social media as they constantly, team with information. Some of it may be useful to us and supporting, but then sometimes we get misled and some information are even damaging. So today, as we prepare for our esteemed guest to share with us on the understanding on the role that is played by our peers in reproductive health. And today's topic, just to have a recap of what we expect, is the role of peers in SRH, knowledge, attitudes, and practices. I won't go much deeper into it, but then we'll get to understand more about it as Barbara comes in later on. So right about now, we're going to start by a word of prayer. And Cheryl, would you kick it off by a word of prayer, kindly?
Okay, let's pray. Dear Lord, we come before your presence this time. We commit this meeting before you, that you will grant us favor and that we'll be able to get all that we can. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And Cheryl, again, I'd like just to say, I hope all of us said amen. I'd like you to just before we started this today's session, we have some questions and comments from the audience. We shared kind of like what some of us understand about the topic that we have today, and we have some comments and questions. I think we're going to delve into them later on, but right now I'd like Cheryl just to mention a few of them kindly. Cheryl, are you there?
Yes, I am. Kindly give
Or
me like
okay.
5 minutes. You can just go ahead.
Okay, no problem. So let me just read on what others understand about the topic of today. So we asked, like, what comes to mind when you hear this topic? So some of the responses are as follows: like peer pressure, period shaming, sexual health orientation, changed views about how we address sex and what we allow the younger generation to perceive their sexual health. A circle of friends is only as enlightened about sex as the most enlightened among them. Hmm, okay. Getting advice and guidance about uh, SRH from young people that are more relatable. The female reproductive cycle. The responses are: does one's environment, quote unquote, friends, the physical location or residence, affect or influence their sexual reproductive health? That's a question mark. And some are sexual orientation, just a repetition of that. And then I'm just excited to hear what she has under the meaning of sex according to the female gender. What does reproductive health encompass? So these will be tackled by our esteemed guest of today. And right about now, I'm going to introduce her so that she can share with us. And I hope all of us are going to learn one or two. And as we continue with this session, I'm also so excited to learn more. Yes, so Barbara, I hope you're ready. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Miss Barbara, who is, she's going to talk more about herself. And she's the National Officer for Standing Committee of Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. She's also a student, a very busy one, and we appreciate you being here with us. And she's also, let me just say, IFMS a program coordinator for maternal health and access to safe abortion. I think she's gonna talk more about it later on. So welcome, Barbara. The floor is yours.
Um, okay, thank you, Miriam. I trust that you can all hear me. I'm just having a bit
Yes, we
of
can.
trouble because I cannot present. I don't know what's going on. Gene and the sorts. So yes, I mostly identify as a program coordinator for maternal health because my term as national officer has come to an end. And yes, if anyone wants to know more about all this, you can feel free to get in touch with me. I believe Cheryl has all my contacts. So next slide. Yes, so I'm a meme person. I just love putting random memes in my presentation. I hope you guys will be okay with that because this is more of a monologue considering what I was told to cover is so wide. I'd just like to welcome you and welcome aboard. I hope by the time we reach, I think, slide number 30, I trust that you'll have learned a thing or two, or maybe you'll have reminded yourself a thing or two. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions, even if it's interrupting me in the middle, I do not mind. If you have an urgent question, just ask. Feel free to interact. And please, for the sake of my self-esteem, please answer any questions I ask so that at least I feel encouraged that you're following through. Yes, and just know that this is a safe space. We are allowed to talk about anything and everything. And if you're not courageous enough, again, Cheryl has my contact. You can feel free to contact me via WhatsApp, and I'll answer your questions truthfully and in the best way possible that I can. Next slide. Oh dear. Next slide. Okay, so I'll start with an overall summary and then we'll get into the role of peers later on. Considering it's an introductory session, we'll start first with the definitions of things and getting to familiarize ourselves with a few concepts here and there. So now we're starting with the definition of social determinants of health as defined by the WHO Commissions on the Social Determinants of Health. They are basically the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age. So basically, everything that surrounds you from the time that you are born to death, that is basically a social determinant of health. And everything and anything will technically influence your health, be it sexual, be it mental, everything and anything around you actually has an impact on your health, sexual or otherwise. And these conditions or circumstances are shaped by families and communities and by the distribution of money, power, and economic resources at all levels, meaning at worldwide level, national and local levels, and it's affected by policy choices at each of these levels. Next slide. So another key message, adolescence is a second sensitive developmental period in which puberty and rapid brain maturation leads to a new set of behaviors and capacities that trigger or enable transitions in family, peer, and educational domains and in health behaviors. So these transitions modify childhood trajectories towards health and well-being. The strongest determinants when you're an adolescent are, for example, structural factors like the national wealth, the inequalities in income, and the access to education. So why I specifically put this is because peer education is mainly focused at people who are either pre-adolescent or adolescent. And it's important to know that this is a very important period where people go through changes physically, mentally, psychologically, and emotionally. So I hope everything is okay with that. Next slide. So furthermore, if there are safe and supportive families and safe and supportive schools, together with positive and supportive peers, these are very crucial in helping the young people to develop to their full potential and attain the best health, sexual health and otherwise, in the transition to adulthood. So improving adolescent worldwide requires improving young people's daily lives with families and peers in schools, addressing risk and protective factors in the social environment at a population level, and focusing on factors that are protective across various health outcomes. So basically in these two statements in these slides, we see that everything and anything impacts your health, and whether sexual or otherwise, your family, the schools that you're in, your peers, it will all impact and influence your health. And even your access to education, for instance, it will have an impact on your sexual health, because the more educated you are, the better you make wiser and more informed choices. Yes, so next slide. So the most effective interventions are probably the structural changes so that you can improve the access to education and employment of people to reduce the risk of transport-related injury. So in this case, education always makes a difference in regards to the decisions one makes about their lives. So when like the youth are more educated, they're able to make more educated and informed decisions, just like I said. Other crucial aspects are ensuring participation of young people in policy, service development, and building capacity in personnel and data systems in adolescent health. Next slide. So there are a few terms that are used to describe the social determinants of health. Remember, we're looking at health broadly, and then now we'll look at the SRHR aspects and the impact of peer pressure and peers and what their role is. So for social determinants of health, as I had defined previously, they're the circumstances in which people live, including economic, political, social, environmental, and cultural conditions that affect the health of these individuals. Social stratification basically means the status inequalities between individuals in a social system, meaning like those high class, middle class, low class. Basically, that's a social stratification. Next slide. Structural determinants, I think I had mentioned that in the key messages section. They are fundamental structures of the national state that generate social stratification, such as national wealth, income inequality, educational status, sexual or gender norms, or ethnic groups. Yes, next slide. And proximal or intermediate determinants. So these are the circumstances of daily life that range from the quality of the family environment and peer relationships through availability of basic needs such as food, housing, and recreation, and access to education as well. So proximal determinants, they are generated by the social stratification, that is the classes, high class, middle class, low class, and they result from the structural determinants, but are generated through cultural, religious, and community factors. So they also, proximal determinants, they will establish individual differences in exposure and vulnerability to factors that compromise health. Next slide. So yes, now we all know that in adolescence, there's something that it's a period where we are transitioning to adulthood, and it is a period where there are a lot of changes, and for many, we might be trying to find our identities, which is why at this stage especially is where you find that peer influence is very strong. And we're now going to look at some of the processes that allow unique opportunities for the social determinants to affect the health in an adolescent. So the first point is CNS, meaning the central nervous system, which is basically, let me just say mentally, and the pubertal development, they drive identity formation, new behaviors, and new causes of ill health. A good example would be like some people, some adolescents, they adopt behaviors like that may be dangerous, which includes smoking, drug abuse, and early sexual intercourse that might be risky to health. However, some of them may see it normal depending on their social development, depending on the factors that they've grown around. Yes, so life stage transition and changes in personal and social responsibility and relationships are entailed. And the World Bank World Development Report of 2007 outlined that there are 5 important transitions for young people. Next slide. These 5 important transitions for young people, we all know them. Learning is the first one, like when you transition from primary or grade school to secondary schooling or high school, and from secondary school to higher education, which is university. Second transition is work, when you're transitioning from education into the workforce. The third one is health, when you transition from being taken care of by your parents in regards to your health to taking responsibility for your own health. The fourth one is family, when you transition from family living to autonomy, like you're the baby of the house, to early marriagehood, and then finally to becoming a parent. The fifth one is citizenship, which is transition to responsible citizenship, meaning you get to vote, you get to do all these legal duties that citizens do. You have to pay your taxes. Yes. So there's also the experience of unequal chances related due to sex, due to ethnic origin, due to education, employment, social economic status, and also sometimes due to the race, as we all know. These are all challenges that we face even as we transition from childhood to adulthood. Next slide. So yes, and now we're slowly getting into the role of peers. And as you know, most of you, I'm very sure, when we were all young and we were all children, majority of the time we used to spend in school. Like you basically go to school from 8 a.m. to 4 a.m., then you come back home and you sleep, take supper, sleep, and wake up. The next morning you're off to school. So obviously we know that within the school environment, that is where we get most of the exposure to our peers. We get to spend most of our childhood with our peers and, in our cluster groups and in our cliques. That's where we mainly develop our personalities and our behaviors and our hobbies. And I'm very sure all of you are agreeing behind the muted mics. So in the school environment, in addition to access to education functioning as a structural determinant, there's a strong evidence, of course, from the higher income countries, that stronger connection of young people, their parents to the school, together with aspects of school environment such as leadership and safety, they positively affect many health outcomes directly. Meaning, if you go to a good school, which has a good and warm environment, and the teachers are well informed and they inform you well about your health status and how to take care of yourself, you're bound to have healthy practices, including the peers that you have in school, the friends that you have. If they have those principles of we should not engage in sex early enough because these are the risks, or if we do engage in sex, we should engage in safe sex and these are the contraceptives to use, you're more bound to healthy outcomes in life because you have made informed decisions influenced by the positive energy around you. So there's also emerging evidence that connections within the school, it will protect against a wide range of risky health behaviors in middle and low income countries. Next slide. So again, in the school environment, programs that improve secondary school environment and correctness are the most promising large-scale interventions for improving health outcomes in adolescents. And they need further study, of course, in countries like ours. If you've noticed, most education programs, peer education programs, are focused to mostly, not really all of them, they're focused on the high school kids or the primary school kids, because this is where they spend most of their time, and this is the place where they get the people around them who influence their behavior most. So I hope that point has come across clearly. If you need further clarification or for me to rephrase it, just let me know. Next slide. Okay, this is the next slide. Yes, so for peers, the emerging of strong peer relationships is one of the key developmental stages of early adolescence. And peers, as I have said before, can either have a positive or a negative influence on young people's health. The strong connections with prosocial peers, that is peers who are very social, can support positive health, with peer connections protecting against a broad range of healthy risky behavior. Similarly to family factors, peer modeling and awareness of peer norms are protective against violence, substance misuse, and sexual risk. What this means is if your group of friends are against substance abuse or they're against they're against risky sexual behaviors, you're also more bound to be influenced, especially at this age, to follow with the norms, to follow with the rules that your clique has. Although most studies are from high-income countries, and I'll continue emphasizing, similar findings have been shown in low-income and middle-income countries. Although Kenya, I didn't find any evidence, sadly. Next slide. So, on the other hand, peer factors can also increase risk because with peer participation in behaviors likely to increase risk of smoking initiation and persistence, alcohol initiation and use, sexual risk and violence. Other peer relationship characteristics, they affect health, such as partner communication and negotiation, particularly affecting sexual risk and HIV risk in low and middle income countries and even in high income countries. So the social networking and new media are providing new opportunities for peer factors to affect health. And peer influence, it operates within a social context, both in terms of family and neighborhood contexts and structural determinants, meaning that peer influence will be from school, your schoolmates, your friends in school, and they can also be from home, the friends you have among your neighbors, and also the friends you may have, for example, in the church or in the mosque. I hope that has come out clearly. Next slide. Okay, so sorry, I think I've stopped seeing the slides. Wait. Yes, I think we're in the next slide now. Never mind, just a small hitch. So peer influence will always operate as a counterpoint to continued parental influence throughout adolescence, although parental influence declines relative to peers in many domains. This means basically as you grow up, you tend to listen more to your friends, or rather you tend to pay more attention to what your friends say and think, as opposed to actually listening to your parents, which is why parents tell us that we're being rebellious and we're being rude, especially during adolescence. And yes, there's very few data to support this, but I think we've all seen it as we were growing up. And we all know that urbanization and economic development have eroded the cultural traditions and norms, and they've increased the influence of peer groups where there are very many dislocated or deprived young people, which is very true, and I think we all know this. So next slide. So an example now of negative peer pressure, I'm going to use sexual debut, which is sexual initiation, like the first time you have sex, basically. The prevalence of sexual experience among close friends will always have a direct impact on the adolescent sexual initiation. So the attitude of your close friends about sex will have a direct impact on when you yourself will begin having sexual intercourse. And the prevalence of sexual experience among their friends, of course, and their attitudes will be related to their perceptions of gaining respect for friends or having sex, which will definitely have a direct impact on your sexual initiation. Meaning, if you have a group of friends, and let's say one of you has had the first time, they've had sex for the first time, and they're just speaking so well and positively about it, there's a greater risk, or rather a greater chance, that there will be a bit more pressure for the others who have never had sex to initiate sex early, because their friend saw it as a positive experience and it motivated the group of friends. It's more of a psychological explanation, really, but I hope I'm making sense, and like in your heads, it's making sense in one way or another. Next slide. So basically, the magnitude of influence associated with friends' sexual behavior and their attitude will be strongest among the adolescents who are highly involved with their close friends. Yes, I believe I've explained this. So next slide. Do you have any more examples on negative peer pressure in regards to SRHR? And I'd really like a few people to answer. And before you do, I just want to clarify, SRHR is sexual orientation, sex, contraceptives, anything and everything, even gender-based violence and how relationships should be like. Yes. So does anyone have any more examples on negative peer pressure in regards to SRHR? Anyone?
Hi, Barbara. Just before
Hi, Oma.
we our audience, there is enough. So I'd just like you to kind of respond to some.
Hello, you're breaking. Oh my, what is my internet bug? Guys?
Can you hear me?
Okay, you had like disappeared.
Okay, I think it's my network, not yours, really. So can you hear me, or my voice is still breaking?
No, I can hear you clearly.
Okay, so I was just saying that before we started the session, we had comments and questions from our audience sent earlier, and it would just mean well if you respond to some of it. I'm not sure if Cheryl shared them with you.
Okay, so maybe I have some questions is that they are too broad. Like some questions were asking me like an entire topic worth of information.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think most of them you've talked about them. So it's kind of like an introduction of what we'll be discussing for the next, like this is the first month and for March and April. So as we continue to discuss more, we'll get to understand better. So maybe some questions came are touching on next month's discussion and even the other month as well.
Okay, all right. So I'll still try my best and answer at the very end when I finish. That's fine. If they'll
Okay. Yeah, that's very much okay. Okay.
So has anyone thought of the question? At least examples, please, for my self-esteem.
We're together, Barbara. So I'm trying to think of. I feel like the reason is there are so many examples, but there are also many factors in play. So negative peer pressure in regards to SRH. I think it's more so like I'm trying to think about. Let me talk about relationships because that's more relatable and it's controversial. I think growing up, the school I went to actually people dating very early. So that's just the kind of vibes you'd get like if you're not in a relationship and there's something that's happening. Even talking to my friends in campus right now, just the thought about relationships, how relationships should be, the fact that you should be one and if you're not one then you're not set for life. I think that's the kind of pressure that you get to you end up being in a relationship even if you're not ready, or you end up rebounding a lot because you want to stay in a relationship. So that's an example right off the bat. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. I'll also give out another example I've remembered. Like at some point in my class, literally this class, this medical school class that I've been in since first year, there was a time, I think during the beginning, no, okay, let me just say within the first year, there was like pressure in getting sugar daddy. Apparently it was very, very fashionable, and because people used to like look at the lives of the girls who had like sugar daddies and they looked so sweet, of course, but the price was very, very, like the price of that kind of lifestyle is very high. So I like there was a specific clique of girls in our class who all got sugar daddies within that year, because there's one who had actually entered university dating one, and she had a very lavish lifestyle. Like, she just had everything. Like, here you're living in the hostels, and her, she's there living in an apartment that's like 15,000 per month, which is very expensive for Nakuru standards. And she has fridge, microwave, TV, she has everything. And you just have your suitcase and your beddings, you know? So there used to be that kind of negative pressure. It's really sad, like that whole clique, they've all had a lot of drama going on to this, like 5 years along the line. They've had a lot of drama. Of course, there were fights, some were beaten up. So yeah, that was an example of negative peer pressure in med school. Yes, when we were all beyond teenagers. Does anyone else have another example before I proceed? Please, I just want to hear your beautiful voices. Please. Anyone?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, yes. I can say something. My name is Lee, and I'm part of GWET. I'm originally from Kenya, but now I'm in Sweden. And I can say, before then, when I was back in Kenya, I mean, relationship is just part of it's another thing. You get in a relationship. Sometimes you have sex, for example. It's common. You can't just have sex without being in a relationship. And then I moved to Sweden, and then you find like, it's never the same. People just there's so much pressure when it comes to sex. You don't have to be in a relationship, for example, for you to have sex. So it's just something that people do for fun, and I've really had like a hard time adjusting to that. You know, you can't just, there's no relationship. People just have sex for fun, and I think I would say that's like one of the hardest things that I've had to deal with. So yeah.
Thank you, Lydia. I think you had also unmuted your mic. Would you like to speak?
Yes, more from a boys. I'm now a man, but this from a boys' side, and I don't know if it's relevant or not. So, you know, the conversations is reminding me of the days I was a kid. During primary school, but upper primary. So when classmates. But I think we were not, like, I mean, I don't know if we knew what we were doing, but I think it affected people's kind of esteem, especially girls, because then you'd find some ladies soil themselves. They didn't know that their, menses were coming or something like that. And then we troll them. It was fun at that time. I didn't realize that, we actually, negatively affecting them. I don't know if that affects, I don't know if that is relevant, but I think that's the experience that I've had. I've been a perpetrator of that as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's actually a very good example, because people don't usually react to menstrual accidents the way they should be. Like, they're not properly informed. People tend to laugh. I don't know, even girls used to laugh at other girls when that used to happen. So in a way, and you'd found if you're the one who's quiet, like, you just look like the weird one, or you'll be mocked. So you just had to join in the mocking. That is an example of negative peer pressure. And thank you, Calvins, for bringing in menstrual hygiene into the conversation. It's a it's a topic close to my heart. So we'll now proceed to the last, sort of the last part of